Over the last year and a half, I built a lot of commander decks for this channel. Some of them completely exploded in popularity, some of them became community favorites, and some of them honestly aged way better than I ever expected. But over the last year, there's been one thing I kept seeing over and over again in the YouTube comments and the Discord. Panzer, are you ever going to update your older deck lists? And honestly, that's a totally fair question. Because let's be real, Magic has been releasing new cards at an absolutely ridiculous pace lately, and some of my older decks did get upgrades that feel like they were specifically designed for them. So a while back I made a community post asking you guys which older decks you would like to see revisited, and today as a 20k subscriber special I decided to deliver exactly that. We're gonna go through some of the most requested decks on the channel and talking about the cards I'd really consider if I did rebuild them today. Now this is not going to be a full rebuild of those decks, and we're not going full spreadsheet mode with the exact cuts either. This video is much more about exploring all of the new options we got in recent sets and looking back at these decks in hindsight. There's also no way I could realistically cover every deck I've ever built, otherwise this would turn into a 20-hour video. But if there is a specific deck you want to see the exact cuts and the newer additions for, we do have a dedicated thread for every deck I've ever built over in the deck archive on our Discord server, where you can always ask any questions and discuss new additions with the community. And let's begin with the commander that started this entire YouTube journey, the Necrobloom, the first deck I ever made a video about. At the time I was just really excited to get back into Magic and I picked this zombie cabbage as my commander. I made a video on it just for fun to see if people would even like this type of content, and now here we are about a year and a half later and more than 60 decks deeper. So yeah, this card will always hold a really special place in my heart. Not just because it basically started this entire channel, but also because it genuinely is still my favorite deck to this day, even after building more than 60 others. And for those who somehow still don't know what the Necrobloom does, it's basically a giant land recursion and token generating engine. Whenever lands enter the battlefield under our control, it will start generating plant and zombie tokens, while at the same time also giving all land cards in our graveyard the Dredge 2 mechanic, just allowing us to recur them over and over again and fill our graveyard. I've gotten the same question so many times over the last year. Panzer, did you actually keep updating your deck over time? Yeah, I absolutely did, because newer sets have given this deck some insanely powerful landfall and graveyard recursion tools to work with. And for this list, since it is the most requested one, I will be giving you the exact cards I took out for these new inclusions. Hands down, one of the best landfall cards we got over the last year has to be Ice Still Explorer, aka Shiny Space Insect. And this card basically does everything that the deck wants to be doing. It genuinely is an auto-include for any sort of Necrobloom list. Right away, this insect combines both a Crucible of Worlds and an Exploration in a single card, allowing us to both play an additional land every turn and allowing us to play them from our graveyard. And for this deck specifically, that combination is just absurd, because once we start dredging our lands with the Necrobloom, this card essentially turns our graveyard into a second hand filled with constant land drops, while at the same time also accelerating our mana and guaranteeing us additional landfall triggers. But what really pushes this card over the top is the fact that it also has its own landfall ability. Every time a land enters the battlefield under our control, we will have to mill one card, just synergizing perfectly well with its previous two abilities, because the more lands we play, the more lands we will get available in our graveyard. It's honestly one of those cards that if you told me this was gonna be a thing back when I built the deck, I would have simply never believed you that this was gonna be a real Magic card. The Shiny Space Insect ended up replacing the Ramunap Excavator in my list. Not because the little snake is a bad card or anything, but Ice Still Explorer just feels like a premium version of its effect. Now that we're on the topic of landfall power creep, we also got Traveling Chocobo, a card that for as long as it is on the battlefield allows us to look at the top card of our library and then then allows us to play land cards straight from the top, effectively giving us some sort of card advantage for as long as we do have a land up there. But the really crazy part is its second ability, that whenever any land entering the battlefield would trigger an ability of a permanent we control will make it trigger an additional time, meaning that we'll get double the zombies from our Necrobloom and our Field of the Dead, double the insects from our Skewed Swarm, and double the mana from cards like a Lotus Cobra and a Nissa, which honestly is some pretty crazy value for just a 3-drop creature. This card is basically an ancient green warden for half the mana cost, and that's also the card it ended up replacing. Another card I ended up including that turned out to be way stronger than expected is Lash, Mother of Machines. Another card that, just like a traveling chocobo, will allow us to double up on all of our landfall triggers, which from a pure value perspective alone already makes this card a really good fit for the deck. But where our White Phyrexian Mummy gets really disgusting is her second ability, that will just prevent all of our opponents enter the battlefield triggers from ever happening. And this effect can just completely shut down some specific decks. Token players won't be able to ping down the table with their Bugfuckers anymore, Kiki Jiki combos just don't work anymore, and it even prevents our opponents from playing a Bojuka Bog and exiling our graveyard, which honestly is a pretty big deal for this deck. I still remember playing against this card back in the day and it just completely shutting down my own Necrobloom deck, so I just had to include it in the list. And over time this card ended up taking the spot of a Dryad of the Elysian Grove in my list, which always felt a little awkward for the mana curve of this deck, and it just didn't have that big of an impact. Another small upgrade I made over time is swapping in an Angel of Indemnity for our good old Sun Titan. And while both of these cards have a really similar effect that will just return a permanent from our graveyard to the battlefield, the reason I decided to make the swap is due to this card having the Encore mechanic, that even if we do end up milling our own Angel of Indemnity, will just allow us to bring it back to the battlefield and generate a token copy of it attacking every opponent. And since all 3 of these tokens all have their individual ETB trigger, we will get to bring back 3 total permanents, making this card pretty crazy, especially in the late game once you do have a ton of targets in your graveyard and the mana available. The Edge of Eternity set also gave us a really potent little spacecraft in the form of Exploration Broodship. Since in this deck we'll constantly be generating zombie tokens, we will always have a huge amount of creatures around that we can use to station this spacecraft and unlock its effects. At just 3 charge counters, this spacecraft essentially turns into an exploration, allowing us to play 1 additional land every turn, which obviously is just perfect for a deck like this. And once you do get this thing fully stationed up at 8 charge counters, it will allow you to just recast any permanent card straight from your graveyard by just sacrificing a land as an additional cost, simply giving the deck another layer of recursion and resilience, especially in the grindier games where we already have half of our library in our graveyard. And the best part is that sacrificing a land as an additional cost is barely even a downside for us, because most of the time we just want our lands to be in our graveyard so we can get them back with effects like a Lumiga or an Aftermath Analyst. And the card I took out for this one is Azusa, which honestly I already decided to take out of the deck 2 weeks after I released the video. I was barely ever able to make use out of the 2 additional land drops that she provided, and Azusa just feels like a power crapped card. Whenever you do compare them to some of the newer additions we got like an Icestill Explorer, she's just not good enough anymore. Spymaster's Vault. To this day I still don't understand why I didn't include this card in my original list. It even released in the same set as the Necrobloom. For just a single black mana, it will allow target creature to connive X, X being the total amount of creatures that die this turn. Since we're always gonna be controlling a huge amount of zombies and plants and we are playing a ton of board wipes in this deck, this land will really consistently allow you to connive up to like 20 times, which will then allow us to dig really deep into our deck, just keeping the cards we need into our hand, while at the same time also dumping a huge amount of cards into our graveyard we can just recur later. The card I ended up replacing this with is a Cabal Coffers, which was included to generate us a huge amount of mana when combined with an Ardbert, but it always felt really awkward and slow to assemble that combo. And the deck deck just simply never had a use for that much black mana anyways. Now since I ended up cutting Cabal Coffers from the deck, Ardbert had to go as well, and in its place I decided to include a Lazo Tap Quarry, a land that baseline will just tap for a colorless mana, and if we do sacrifice a creature when we tap it, we get 1 mana of any color instead, which will just help you with your mana fixing because we will always have sacrifice fodder available in the form of zombie and plant tokens, and if an opponent played a Darksteel mutation on your Necrobloom, this does give you a way to deal with that. Now where the real money's at is that we can invest a ton of mana into this card and sacrifice it to exile a creature from our graveyard and generate a 4/4 zombie token copy of it, which does give this deck another really solid recursion tool that we can easily tutor up because it is a land. You can use this to get a copy of your Cultivator Colossus, your Skewed Swarm, or just any other high value creature we do end up milling early in the game. And since this card is a land after you did sacrifice it, you can just use Necrobloom's Dredge 2 ability to get it back to your hand and use it over again. And the last and the newest addition to our zombie cabbage is Cauldron of Essence, an artifact that does come attached with a Zulaport Cutthroat effect that will make each opponent lose 1 life and gain us 1 life whenever any of our creatures die, essentially giving us a way to win the game because we can just stack up a huge amount of tokens, then cast a board wipe, and we will just be able to drain out the entire table in 1 go. For 3 mana and sacrificing any of our creatures, we get the ability to put a creature card from our graveyard straight back onto the battlefield. And in a deck like this that will always be milling huge threats into its own graveyard while at the same time also generating you an army of sacrifice fodder tokens, this simple 3 mana pot will allow you to make some really huge plays, enabling you to just trade in any of your zombie or plant tokens for any of the huge beaters in this deck like an Elesh Norn, a Lumra, or even your Cultivator Colossus. And this card took the spot of World Shaper, which is one of our splendid reclamation effects, but there are just better ones in the deck, and this one always required a little sort of setup to make happen. Next up we have Cloud, ex-Soldier, which is the very first equipment deck that I've ever built. And that is because most equipment decks do force you into playing some sort of a Voltron playstyle, which personally has never really been my thing. Cloud really felt like a fresh breath of air for the entire archetype, because instead of rewarding you for just stacking a ton of equipment on a single creature, instead he does reward you for spreading your equipment across as many creatures as possible and rewarding you with card draw. But sadly, in the most recent Magic sets, we didn't get really that much support for equipment decks. That being said, there are still a couple of newer cards worth considering for him. And probably the best new addition that Cloud got over the last year is Amy Rose. Thanks to her having haste, we will immediately be able to generate value on the turn she comes down with her attack trigger, that whenever she attacks will allow you to attach an equipment to her for free and give a power boost to another attacking creature, which just synergizes incredibly well with Cloud's abilities. Since Amy will become automatically equipped, we will get to draw an additional card of Cloud's first ability, while at the same time also boosting Cloud's power, and whenever it does go over 7, we will get to generate those 2 treasure tokens. Thorin, Mountain King. And while technically this card hasn't released yet, it does feel like the perfect fit for this deck. Whenever he enters a battlefield, we simply get to pick up all the equipment we control and attach it to target creature, which already is incredibly strong in a dedicated equipment deck like this, just allowing us to bypass any sort of equip costs. But on top of that, after the ability did resolve, the equipped creature will then also deal damage equal to its power to any other creature, making Thorin function as a really solid removal tool, while at the same time also allowing us to bypass some of the massive equip costs in this deck. When I saw this card got spoiled, I immediately thought, yeah, this has to go in my Cloud deck. A less flashy but really cool card we got in the Teenage Mutant Ninja set is Novel Nunchaku, and while its effect is pretty simple, it does fit this deck surprisingly well. When it enters a battlefield, it will automatically attach to one of your creatures, and then that creature will fight another target, effectively giving the deck another removal tool attached to an equipment piece. And on a later turn, we will just be able to get this onto our Cloud how to give him trample, ensuring that he can get a huge amount of commander damage through once he is stacked up with all of our powerful equipment. And the last card I want to mention for Cloud is Dog Ox Tentacles, which is basically a 4/4 stat boost attached to an equipment that has a ridiculous equip cost of 5 mana. But the important part is that whenever any creature you control with mana value 5 or greater enters the battlefield, it will automatically attach to it, making this card function in exactly the same way as the best equipment card in the entire deck, a Colossus Hammer. We can simply play this card on turn 1, and then whenever Cloud does enter the battlefield, it will automatically attach, pushing him to 8 power, and whenever we now swing with him, we will get to generate those 2 treasure tokens. Next up, we have a true classic, Edgar Markov, which was the second video I ever made for this channel, and it ended up being a massive success. At the time, I just wanted to build a cool vampire tribal list abusing the eminence mechanic, and a lot of people really seemed to love it. The build itself was actually pretty straightforward, but the fact that Edgar will generate us value from the command zone without us ever having to cast him makes this deck completely absurd. And for the longest time, this deck really didn't get all that many new toys to play with. But then the Strixhaven set dropped and suddenly we got a ton of really good new vampires for good old Edgar. Arnin, Deadbloom Botanist. If you've seen my original Edgar list, you probably remember that I went really heavy on the Drain package, mainly because I wanted the deck to still function even if our opponents were able to deal with our entire board of vampires by casting a board wipe. So naturally, the moment I saw Arnin, I instantly thought, yeah, this is just the perfect match for Edgar, because just like cards like a Vengeful Blood Witch, she will drain an opponent whenever any of her creatures die, but instead of just draining for 1 life, she will do so for 2, which honestly becomes really scary in a deck where all of our vampire tokens and most of the vampires in our deck only have 1 toughness. Stasnian Sanguinist, a vampire body that has the new prepare mechanic. Whenever we attack, we get to give one of our creatures that touch, and if that creature does deal combat damage to an opponent, this card becomes prepared. And in a deck that's playing a ton of evasive vampire bodies, getting this card online will be incredibly easy. Then whenever it is prepared, we will be able to cast the Exsanguinate spell part on this card, giving the deck yet another way to drain out the entire table and close out games. Talking about evasive vampire bodies, we also got Scheming Silvertongue, that just like the previous card also has the prepare mechanic. The only thing we have to do is make sure we gain 2 life by the time we get to our second main phase, which in this deck is incredibly easy to achieve thanks to all of our drain effects and this creature having lifelink itself, meaning it will be really easy to just keep getting this creature prepared over and over again, and whenever we do so, we do get to cast the Sign in Blood, giving this deck an incredible source of repeatable card draw, which is just perfect whenever you are going into some grindy games. Emeritus of Woe. Whenever we play it, it will enter the battlefield already prepared, instantly giving us access to the spell part of this card, Demonic Tutor. And whenever 2 creatures die during our turn, it will just prepare itself again, meaning that this thing will give us repeatable access to one of the cards on the Game Changer list. And even though I'm still testing if the mana investment is worth it for this deck, the ceiling on this card does seem incredibly high. And apparently Wizards did decide to just keep pushing these incredible vampires with the prepare mechanic. Bloodline Recollector, an incredibly potent card that will release later this year in the Reality Fracture set. Once it is prepared, we do get access to Ancestral Craving, which basically is the black version of an Ancestral Recall. You know, one of the literal cards of the Power 9. For a single black mana on instant speed, it will draw us 3 cards. And since this creature will check its prepare mechanic at the beginning of each end step and not just our own, it has the potential to draw us up to 12 cards per turn cycle, which honestly sounds kinda ridiculous when you say it out loud. And the last card I wanted to mention for Edgar is a Bloodline Bidding. Thanks to the spell having Convoke, we will be able to tap all of our vampire fodder tokens that Edgar generated, and usually we will be able to cast it for no mana at all. And when we do, it will just bring back all of the vampires from our graveyard straight to the battlefield, giving this deck a really powerful get out of jail for free card if your opponents did manage to wipe your board. Because instead of having to rebuild or board 1 vampire at a time, we will instantly get back all the vampires we did lose over the course of the game. Next up, we have VNWXT, VNWXT, also known as Vinny, and this might actually be the most unique deck I built for the channel. At the time I made the video there were barely any other Vinny lists out there, so the deck building process really felt like exploring new horizons, and I genuinely think that my video on Vinny made him go up a couple of ranks over on the DH rack, which makes me really proud, especially considering how niche the deck was at the time. And let's start with the most obvious inclusion for this deck, Krang the All-Powerful, a creature that will simply double up any trigger that happens as a result of us drawing a card, meaning that things like a Psychosis Crawler will deal double the amount of damage, and a card like Aether Siphon will just mill our opponents twice as fast. Krang basically cuts the amount of time we need to be able to close out a game in half. Flitterwing Nuisance. If you've seen the original Vinny video, you probably remember that I did include a huge amount of 1-drop evasive creatures, mainly because we want to get to max speed as fast as possible and get Vinny's ability online from as early as turn 4. Right away, this card is already a 1-mana flyer, making it naturally function as a speed enabler, and whenever we activate its ability by removing a counter for the remainder of the turn, whenever any of our creatures now connect to an opponent, we will get to draw 1 card per creature. Since we will always be playing these cheap evasive creature bodies during the early turns of the game, once your Vinny is then online and you activate this card's ability, you can now swing with them and you will be drawing a huge amount of cards, which will also be doubled up thanks to Vinny's ability. And I can't be talking about Vinny without mentioning one of the most absurd card draw spells they printed in years, Meta Magics. For double X and 2 blue mana, target player simply gets to draw 2 to the power of X cards. If the X is 3, this will result in 8 cards, if X is 4, it will be 16 cards, and if X is 5, it will draw you a total of 32 cards. And in this deck specifically, where we are playing some really crazy mana acceleration tools like a High Tide and an extra planar lens, this card can go absolutely crazy. Because keep in mind that Vinny's ability will even double the amount of cards we draw of this spell, meaning this spell will make it really easy to just draw your entire deck in one go, allowing us to just win the game on the spot with one of the 5 unique win conditions we are playing in this deck, which if you haven't seen the video are an Aether Siphon, a Laboratory Maniac, Jace Wielder of Mysteries, 20 Toad, and of course a Psychosis Crawler. Another commander that holds a really special place in my heart is Isshin. 2 heavens as 1, and that's mainly because he promotes what I consider to be fair magic. No weird combos, no infinite turns, just playing some high value creatures and turning them sideways, just winning the game through combat damage. Which is exactly why my favorite color pairs are things like Selesnya, Boros and Mardu. And what better commander exists for that kind of playstyle than Isshin? Because this man just basically looks at every attack trigger and then goes, yeah, let's do that twice. The best new addition we got for Isshin is a Firebender's Ascension. If it enters the battlefield, it will generate you a 2/2 soldier token with Firebending 1, synergizing perfectly with its second ability. Because whenever we do have an attack trigger, this card will just start stacking quest counters, and once you do reach 4 quest counters, it will even start doubling the value of those triggers. Meaning this card is essentially a second copy of Isshin sitting on the battlefield. The craziest part is how easy it is for this deck to get this enchantment online. You can just drop this card on turn 2 and generate you that Firebending token. On turn 3 you can then just drop your Isshin and swing with that token. Isshin will double the Firebending trigger and we will instantly get to place 2 counters onto this enchantment. Long Range Sensor, a card that provides some excellent value by itself but just goes completely nuts once Isshin enters the battlefield. Whenever we attack any player, this card will get 1 counter, or 2 whenever we do have our Isshin out. And due to the way of how this card is worded, it will get a counter for each different player we are attacking. Meaning that if we do have Isshin on the battlefield and we swing at all 3 of our opponents, this card will get a total of 6 counters. Then for just 1 generic mana and removing 2 of those counters, we get to discover 4. Basically turning this card into a repeatable value engine that we can use to just keep cheating spells into play for barely any mana at all. Another really weird card I just had to mention here is Scriv with the Obligator. Whenever it either enters a battlefield or it attacks, it will generate a contract token attached to a creature on opponent's controls. These contract tokens will then give that specific creature a +2 power boost if they are attacking any of your opponents, or they will lose 2 life whenever they decide to attack you. And of course, since generating these contract tokens is an attack trigger, whenever we do have Isshin out, Scriff will generate us 2 of those contracts instead of the singular one. And the reason why I love this card for Isshin is the fact that these contracts are also attack triggers, and Isshin will actually double them up. So whenever your opponents decide to swing at each other, all of these contracts will now give a massive +4 power boost, and if your opponents do decide to swing all of their contracted creatures at you, they will lose a massive 4 life per creature attacking you. Now, is this card an auto-inclusion for any Isshin deck? Probably not, but it's such a weird and political effect that I just had to put it into the video. And the last addition that is just the perfect fit for the token game plan I went for with my Isshin list is an Endless Foot Assault. Whenever we attack with any of our creatures, this enchantment will generate a 1/1 Black Ninja token going at each one of our opponents. And of course, because it is an attack trigger, Isshin will double it, meaning that just 1 copy of this enchantment will generate us a total of 6 tapped and attacking ninjas every combat step. And later in the game, once you do have a bunch of mana available, you can cast this card with its squad cost, allowing you to invest additional mana to get additional token copies of this enchantment on the battlefield. Let's say you do end up with 3 total copies of this on the battlefield. Whenever you now attack with Isshin out, you will get to generate a massive amount of 18 tapped and attacking ninja tokens, which will already deal a huge amount of damage by themselves, while also triggering all of our impact tremors effects and usually just winning us the game on the spot. For the next commander, we have Ognis, the Dragon's Lash, which was one of the first budget decks I've ever built for the channel that really overperformed for the budget it was built on. The entire deck basically revolves around playing the best haste creatures in the game and generating a huge amount of treasures and triggering all of the synergies with them. And to this day, I honestly still don't understand why Ognis isn't more popular as a commander, because the deck is just incredibly straightforward, really explosive, and it enables a playstyle that feels totally different of any other Jund deck out there. And let's start with a big hitter we're getting later this year, Smaug the Magnificent. I genuinely think that this card is going to become a staple in any sort of treasure deck once it releases. It's a 4 mana flying haste dragon that will generate us an immediate treasure token thanks to Ognis on the turn it comes down. But the real kicker on this card is its attack trigger that whenever it attacks will deal damage equal to the amount of treasures we control to any target, basically turning this thing into a repeatable removal engine because we will be controlling a huge amount of treasures at all times in this deck. And a cool thing you can do in this deck is just resolve all of your Ognis triggers first, generating you like 4, 5, 6 treasure tokens. Then as the last attack trigger you can resolve Smaug and it will deal a huge amount of additional damage. And on top of all of that value, Smaug will even generate you an additional treasure token at the beginning of your upkeep. Another really cool card that just got spoiled after I dropped the Ognis video is a Biotech Specialist. When it enters the battlefield, it will generate us a lander token, which on a later turn we can cash in to just accelerate our mana. And whenever we sacrifice any artifact with this creature on the battlefield, it will deal 2 damage to target opponents, which in this deck will always provide you with a huge amount of additional pressure on your opponents because we will always be sacrificing all of our treasures for mana. Obsessive Pursuit. While this card isn't technically a treasure token generator, it does scale incredibly well with our deck. Every upkeep it will generate us an additional clue token that we can use as a repeatable source of card draw, while also triggering all of our group slug effects like an Ingenious Artillerist whenever any artifact enters the battlefield. And whenever we attack, we get to put an amount of +1/+1 counters onto any creature we control equal to the total number of permanents we sacrifice this turn. Considering we'll always be sacrificing a huge amount of treasures for mana, this card can give an incredible stat boost out of nowhere. And if we sacrifice 3 or more permanents in a single turn, that creature will also gain lifelink until the end of turn, both allowing us to deal a huge amount of additional damage while at the same time also stabilizing our life total. Next up, we have 2 cards from the Sonic Secret Lair that just feel like they were made for this deck. The first one being Shadow the Hedgehog. Baseline, this is already a haste creature that we can use to generate treasure tokens with Ognis, but passively whenever any creature we control that has haste or flash would die, Shadow will draw us a card. And considering that almost all of the creatures in this deck do have haste, this does give us a really solid insurance policy against board wipes and removal. Once your opponents are finally able to deal with your board, we will just get to refill our entire hand in the process. And his chaos control ability will give any spell we cast that we used mana from a treasure from the split second mechanic, meaning that our opponents can't activate any abilities or cast any spells for as long as it is on the stack. A really potent effect, especially if you are playing in pots where a ton of counter magic is being played. And the second card from the Sonic Secret Lair is Knuckles the Echidna, a card that is just absolutely stacked to the brim with keywords: double strike, trample, and most importantly haste. Knuckles also has exactly the same passive effect as a professional phase breaker, which already is a staple used in any sort of treasure deck, meaning we will get to generate additional treasure tokens for just doing what this deck wanted to do anyways: play a bunch of haste creatures and turn them sideways. He also comes attached with a really hilarious alternate win condition that at the beginning of your upkeep, if you do control 30 or more artifacts, will just instantly win you the game. And while 30 artifacts might sound like an incredible amount in an Ognis deck, it isn't really all that hard to get there. And the last card I wanted to mention for Ognis is Jaws, Relentless Predator, which once again is a Universes Beyond card. It's a massive creature that has both haste and trample, meaning that it will be incredibly easy for us to connect to our opponents and start generating value. Whenever our big shark does deal combat damage to an opponent, we get to generate that many blood tokens, enabling us to generate a bunch of artifact tokens that will all trigger our group slug effects. But the really scary part is its second ability that will deal 1 damage to each opponent whenever we do sacrifice an artifact, just stacking perfectly with all of the other group slug creatures we are playing in the deck and giving us a way to convert all of our treasure tokens into damage. The next commander is Karlov of the Ghost Council, aka the ghost version of Danny DeVito. To this day, I still think that this is the best live game commander ever printed. The fact that Karlov only costs 2 mana means that he will come down really early every game. And once the live game engine starts rolling, this thing can scale out of control incredibly fast. But what makes Karlov into such a scary commander is its activated ability that gives us access to repeatable exile-based removal on our commander. Thanks to the huge amount of separate live game triggers we are playing in this deck, it's incredibly easy to stack a massive amount of counters onto Karlov, which will then allow you to use his ability multiple times in a single turn and just destroy whatever your opponents are trying to do. This commander takes something as innocent as gaining life and turns it into one of the most oppressive control strategies out there: Halia, Guided by Light. A very good addition for any sort of live game deck that wasn't released yet when I made my original list. She will gain us 1 life whenever any creature or artifact enters a battlefield under our control, which is already really good for Karlov because every time we gain life of this effect, it will be a separate trigger and we will get to stack counters on him. And at the end of our turn, if we did gain 3 or more life, we will get to draw a card of her, which is an incredibly easy requirement to meet in this deck, and Halia will function as both a card draw and a live game engine. Thanks to this card having the warp mechanic, whenever we are about to play a ton of creatures, we can just start off our turn for 1 white mana by warping in this card. We will then get a bunch of additional live game triggers and a card in the process, and on a later turn we can just recast her from exile and get all of her effects again. And a card I also mentioned when I was talking about Edgar is Scheming Silvertongue, which thanks to it having both flying and lifelink will make it really easy to get an additional live game trigger for Karlov. And thanks to us being a dedicated live game deck, this card will just keep repairing itself every single turn for free, allowing us to just draw 2 additional cards every single one of our turns. Moseo, Vane's New Dean, a card that will enter the battlefield accompanied by a 1/1 pass token that will gain us 1 life whenever it attacks, already providing us with additional live gain triggers for Karlov without requiring any other setup. But where the real value comes from is its infusion ability that at the end of our turn, if we did gain life, will allow us to return a creature from our graveyard straight to the battlefield, meaning this creature will provide us with a consistent layer of recursion we can use to just bring back any value creatures we lost over the course of the game. Karzi Revenant, a flying, death touch, lifelink body with a renew ability, meaning that if it does end up in our graveyard, we can simply exile it to put all of his keywords onto another creature. And trust me when I tell you, giving Karlov flying is a really scary thing for your opponents, because in this deck it will be incredibly incredibly easy to get him up to like 20, 30, 40 power with all of the counters we'll be stacking on him, and giving him evasion will make him into a big beatstick that you can use to just take your opponents out of the game by dealing 21 commander damage to them. Defiling Demigod, a creature that is a lot higher on the mana curve, but it does have the potential to just straight up win you games, because at the end of the turn each opponent will lose life equal to the amount of life we gained this turn, meaning that all we need is just one single massive life gain turn to make this card go pop and just instantly take all of your opponents out of the game. For example, you can just use the previous card I mentioned to give Karlov lifelink and then swing in for 30 damage. You can then just pass the turn and your Defiling Demigod will drain each opponent for 30 life. Before we continue with the rest of the deck updates, I want to give a huge shout out to all of the YouTube members. The amount of time, research and effort I put into my weekly deck videos does get kinda ridiculous sometimes, so having people who decide to directly support my content really means the world to me. So if you ever want to support the future of Panzer MTG by yourself and get some additional benefits, you can check out the join button below the video. And to everyone who's already a YouTube member, seriously, thank you for giving me the opportunity and making all of this possible. Next up we have Sonic the Hedgehog, which honestly is one of my favorite decks I've ever built for the channel, mainly because he requires such a specific build around flash and haste creatures while also rewarding you for dealing damage to your own board. And for some reason at its release this video really underperformed for how awesome this commander really is. It's ridiculously fun to just both build and play this deck, and once the engine gets rolling things go absolutely insane in the best possible way. Glen Elendra Guardian, a card that will create some sort of a soft lock on your opponents once you do have your Sonic on the battlefield. By removing a counter from this creature we get to counter target non-creature spell, which already provides us with some really solid counter magic. But once Sonic is on the battlefield, whenever you now attack with him you will be able to stack additional counters onto this creature thanks to it having flash, meaning we will be able to just reload this effect over and over again, and we can use it to deal with any sort of non-creature spell that our opponents are throwing at us, making it nearly impossible for them to ever remove our value creatures or cast any sort of board wipe. Ray Fillet, Wave Warrior, a creature that is basically a bread for the hunt on a stick, because whenever any creature we control with a counter on it would deal combat damage to an opponent we get to draw a card. And thanks to Sonic spreading counters across our entire board we will essentially turn all of our creatures into draw engines. The neat part is that Ray is a flying body that can even trigger its own ability by dealing combat damage, and it's really easy to get a counter on him thanks to him having the evolve mechanic. Ang, Swift Savior, a flash creature body that whenever it enters the battlefield will allow us to airbend up to one spell or creature, meaning that we can just leave 3 mana open, and whenever an opponent is casting a board wipe we can just flash in Ang to protect one of our value creatures, or whenever an opponent is going for a game-winning combo we can just flash him in, airbend one of their spells and stop that combo from happening, making this card function as both a disruption or a protection tool and making it incredibly versatile. Once it is on the battlefield we can waterbend A to make it transform into its backside, which means we can tap artifacts to help pay for the waterbend cost, and thanks to Sonic's ability we will always have a huge amount of treasure tokens at our disposal we can use to activate this ability. And once transformed he turns into a massive creature body that whenever it attacks will put a +1/+1 counter onto each tapped creature you do control, synergizing perfectly with everything we're already trying to do in the Sonic deck and just amping up our counter production even more. Electric Seaweed. Now while this is a really weird card, it does play perfectly into Sonic's second ability that will generate you a treasure token whenever any of your creatures take damage. When it enters until the end of turn, if any other creature dies it will deal 1 damage to every non-wall creature. And all we really need is just one creature dying to set up for some sort of a really crazy chain reaction, because this thing will just keep pulsing damage, and for as long as the damage is taking another creature out it will keep dealing more and more area damage. And since all of your creatures will be taking damage, your Sonic will just go crazy and you will be generating an insane amount of treasure tokens of this effect. Now you do have to be careful when you cast this card because it does have the potential to wipe the entire board including your own. But honestly that's also what makes this effect kinda hilarious, because even if you end up wiping your own board you will be left with like 50, 67 treasure tokens in the process, and you will then be able to use those to instantly rebuild your entire board. effect. When this happens, just make sure you do have a couple of cards in your hand left you can actually play with all the mana you got. Next up we have Sephiroth, which to this day is the best performing video on the entire channel. The timing on that video ended up being just absolutely perfect, because at the time people were insanely hyped for the commander, but there weren't that many high power lists to go around, and he really is the golden child that just has everything going for him. Everyone loves transforming commanders, everyone loves mono black, and everyone enjoys a good sacrifice deck. And one of my proudest achievements is that to this day my list has the highest amount of views out of any other Sephiroth list on Moxfield, which still feels kinda insane, especially considering how popular of a commander he is. And since it's one of my more popular builds, I will be mentioning the specific cards to take out of the deck to include the new ones. A card that ended up releasing a couple of weeks after I made the Sephiroth list is Susurian Voidborn, which is a creature with exactly the same effect as a Blood Artist. Whenever any creature or artifact we controls would die, it will ping 1 damage to target opponent and we will gain 1 life, giving this deck access to yet another really efficient Aristocrat's Drain engine. But what makes this card incredible is the fact that it also has the warp mechanic for just 1 black mana, meaning that if we know we are about to go for a massive sacrifice turn, we can just warp this in for barely any mana, and it will then generate us a massive amount of additional drain triggers to pressure our opponents with. This card ended up replacing Gaius from Balzar, which is a card that whenever it was in my hand I never cast, it just wasn't impactful enough. And another absolutely insane card we got in the Edge of Eternity set is Timeline Color, which does function in a similar way as one of the best creatures in the entire deck, Gravecrawler. Thanks to its ability we will be able to warp it in straight from our graveyard by just paying 2 life and 1 black mana, allowing us to just keep sacrificing and recasting it over and over again for as long as we do have the mana available, making this card incredibly dangerous whenever you do combine it with a sacrifice engine that will generate us mana like a Warren Soul Trader or a Phyrexian Altar, easily setting us up for some infinite sacrifice loops and some combos. And the 2 life cost of its warp ability barely even matters in this Sephiroth deck, because we are playing a huge amount of aristocrat effects that will just gain us life whenever we sacrifice it. The creature that had to go to include this one is a Bloodghast, mainly because its recursion ability is limited by us playing a land and we won't be able to recur it over and over again. It's just more of a once per turn thing. Bitterbloom Bearer, another card that just completely blew my mind from the moment it got revealed. At the beginning of our upkeep it will generate us a 1/1 fairy token, providing us with a really consistent stream of sacrifice fodder. And what makes this card so absurd is the fact that it also comes attached to a creature body itself, that will also contribute to our entire aristocrat strategy whenever it is either destroyed or we do decide to sacrifice it, meaning that both the original body and all the tokens it generates feed into the same sacrifice engine. The card I ended up replacing with this one is a Wriggling Grub, but you could honestly take any token generator in the deck and replace it with this one. It is just that potent. And the last new addition for Sephiroth is my favorite card from the Teenage Mutant Ninja set, Southwind Avatar, which is a card that basically doubles up all the value all of your aristocrat creatures are already generating. Let's say a creature dies and you do get a Blood Artist trigger, you will then ping an opponent for 1 life and you will gain 1 life, and thanks to Southwind Avatar's ability you will get to make each opponent lose 1 more life. And this effect will happen for every separate aristocrat trigger you have in the deck, meaning that Sephiroth himself, your Blood Artist, and all the other aristocrat creatures in this deck start snowballing twice as fast as they normally would. On top of that, this creature will also provide us with additional life gain whenever any of our creatures do die, giving us an additional trigger of its own effect, while also making it incredibly hard for our opponents to ever take us out of the game. And the card I cut from the deck to include this one is Defile. It honestly just felt like overkill to play this much spot removal because we are already playing a ton of Edict and Sacrifice effects to control the board with. Next up we have Ardbert, which is one of my signature Panzer builds. This commander released back in the Final Fantasy set and somehow people are still sleeping on him, which is pretty sad because Ardbert does provide a really unique playstyle. The entire strategy relies on playing a ton of legendary creatures and over the course of the game just stacking them up with counters and keywords. The unique part being that whenever we do cast a spell that's both black and white, we will get to double dip on Ardbert's ability, just scaling our board twice as fast. Even though this commander never became insanely popular, I just had to include it in the video. Abigail, Poet Laureate. It's a legendary multicolored flying creature, already making it into a perfect target to start stacking counters on with Ardbert. But where the real value comes from is its prepare ability, because whenever we cast any creature spell, Abigail will become prepared. And considering Ardbert is such a creature heavy list, we will be able to make it happen really consistently. Now at first glance, the spell side of this card might not seem that impactful because it just puts 1/1/1 counter on a creature for 2 mana. The really important part is that Heroic Stanza itself does count as casting a multicolored spell and will give us both of Ardbert triggers. And because Abigail is this easy to get prepared, it essentially turns into a repeatable value engine that we can just keep casting over and over again to get those Ardbert triggers and buff up our entire board. And we also got a second version of Abigail that I totally include in this deck. Now first up, this thing is just absolutely stacked with keywords. Flying, First Strike and Lifelink on a multicolored legendary creature already make this into a really good body to start stacking counters on with Ardbert. This creature also has a really weird ETB ability that will just make the text box of any creature blank and will replace it with all 3 of our keywords. And let me tell you, this is one of the best ways to shut down decks that do rely on using their commander. Because if you do blank the text box of someone's commander and they have no way to either sacrifice or destroy it, they just permanently lose all of the abilities printed on their commander and they won't ever be able to get it back, which can totally shut down some specific decks. Killian's Confidence. At its core, this is a really simple cantrip spell that, thanks to it being multicolored, will give a massive stat boost to our entire board. But what makes this card truly incredible for an Ardbert deck is its built-in recursion. Whenever any of our creatures does deal combat damage to an opponent, we can pay 1 hybrid mana to bring it back to our hand. Making this into a multicolored spellcast engine we can just keep repeating over and over again over the course of the game, which will just scale our board completely out of control with Ardbert on the field, and it will also draw us a ton of cards. And an Ors of Legend from recent sets is Karai, Future of the Foot, a card that we will be able to cast for her sneak cost if we do control an unblocked attacker to our hand, and it will then enter the battlefield tapped and attacking. And thanks to our commander giving manas to all of our creatures, it will become incredibly easy to get unblocked attackers on the field, and it will enable you to easily sneak this in. Whenever Karai then deals combat damage to an opponent, we get to pick any creature card from our graveyard and return it to our hand. But if the sneak cost was paid, it will return to the battlefield instead, meaning that this card will give us another Ors of Legendary creature body to start stacking counters on with Ardbert, while also functioning as an excellent recursion tool. And last but definitely not least, we have Eshki, Temur's Roar, which ended up being the second most requested deck in the community poll, and also is the only deck on the entire channel that comes even close to how much I love my Necrobloom list. And if you somehow don't know what Eshki does yet, this card is absolutely cracked. The entire deck revolves around you casting creatures with high power, which then Eshki will translate into counter stacking on herself, free card draw, and burning down all of your opponents at once with huge chunks of damage. By far one of the strongest decks I've built on the channel, because when the deck does curve out properly, it can easily close out games from as early as turn 4 or turn 5. And just like I did with Sephiroth and Necrobloom, because this is such a popular request, I will be mentioning the specific card swaps. One of the funniest new Eshki additions is a Bristlebane Battler, because this thing is basically a 2 mana 6/6 trample creature with Ward 2. Now to balance out that absolutely crazy stat line, it will enter the battlefield with 5 -1/-1 counters on itself. But Eshki doesn't care for that part of the ability, she only cares about the power of a creature whenever we cast it. Meaning that for the low cost of 2 mana you do get to trigger all 3 parts of Eshki's ability at her full power. And over the course of the game we will just be playing additional creatures, removing all of the counters from this creature, and you will be able to use it as a beat stick to just hit your opponents with. The card I took out for this is a Foretold Soldier, which at times felt really awkward to use, and this card is just a straight upgrade. And now that we're talking about ridiculously overstated creatures for barely any mana, we also have a Slumbering Trudge, which is a 6 power creature that will enter the battlefield with some stun counters or whatever, but once again the only thing that Eshki cares about is this creature's power when it is on the stack, meaning that for just 1 single green mana we will be able able to trigger all 3 parts of Eshki's ability, somehow making this creature even more potent than the previous card. This card ended up replacing Relic Golem in my list, which basically filled the exact same role as a really cheap 6 power creature, but a Slumbering Trudge just does exactly the same thing for 1 mana instead of 3. Wistfulness, a creature that we can evoke for just 2 mana, meaning that it will instantly get sacrificed from the moment it enters the battlefield. And due to the way of how the mechanics work, whenever you do evoke this out for just 2 mana, it still counts as casting a 6 power creature and will give you all those Eshki triggers. On top of that, depending on the colors of mana we spend to cast this creature, we do also get some additional effects. If we spend double green, we get to exile any artifact or enchantment, and if we spend double blue, it will draw us cards, allowing us to just set up our hand for the perfect storm turn, meaning this creature can basically function as artifact or enchantment removal, card advantage, and a full Eshki trigger package, and all of that for just 2 mana. The card I cut for this is a Pugnacious Hammerskull, which is also a really efficient 6 power body we can cast for just 3 mana, but it's not even close when it comes to terms of utility when compared to Wistfulness. And the last card I wanted to mention for Eshki is Raphael the Muscle, which is a card that was brought to my attention by Perilous Wolf over on Discord. I would have honestly never even considered this card for the deck if it wasn't for him. Now Raphael does have a really cool synergy when combined with Eshki, because he will double all damage dealt by creatures we control that do have a counter on them. And since the entire point of this deck is just stacking counters onto Eshki herself with her own ability, this means that all table-wide damage she now deals with the third part of her ability will be doubled, which does get really scary, especially if you do start chaining multiple high power creatures in a single turn. Now, do I think that you should include Raphael into your Eshki list? Probably not, because he does come at a cost of 5 mana and he only has 4 power. But it's a really cool card with a cool synergy that I just wanted to showcase. And that's it for my Updating Older Decks 20k subscribers special. Looking back at these older lists made me feel really proud of all the projects that I did, and it even made me feel a little emotional. It genuinely felt like taking a trip down Panzer memory lane. And seriously, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank all 20,000 of you for supporting me throughout this journey. What started with me talking about a zombie cabbage in my bedroom actually turned into a full-blown community. It's funny to think how this little piece of cardboard actually changed my life. If there's a specific deck that didn't make it into the video that you do want to see the changes for, make sure to check over the deck archive in the Discord. Every deck I ever made a video about does have a dedicated thread in there that you can use to discuss all the newer changes. And if you enjoyed this type of video, make sure to let me know in the comments below. And who knows, maybe I'll make these update videos into a recurring thing once enough new cards have piled up. But for now, thanks for watching, thanks for the 20k, and I will see you in the next one.